It's fascinating how some places can hold two completely different, almost contradictory realities at the same time. One is this incredible story of ambition and progress, and the other, well, it's a story of control. Today, we're going to try and understand how both of these narratives exist side by side in the modern Gulf. And we're going to start with a statement that's, well, it's impossible to ignore. This quote from an Arab American businessman really sets the stage for the first, and frankly, deeply uncomfortable reality we need to look at: the experience of the millions of migrant workers who quite literally built the modern Gulf. So first, let's talk about the image of the Gulf that most of us are familiar with. You know the one I'm talking about: futuristic cities, mind-bending architecture, and these massive global events that broadcast a message of progress and modernity to billions of people around the world. I mean, from the Qatar World Cup to Dubai hosting the COP28 Climate Summit, the Gulf is without a doubt a major hub for global events. And you have these incredibly ambitious projects like Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030, promising this amazing future of innovation. But all of this, it brings up a really critical question. What's the system that actually builds and services this gleaming facade? Well, the answer lies in a legal framework that governs the lives of the vast majority of people in the region, the migrant workforce. It's a structure known as the Kafala system. So what is it exactly? The Kafala system, or sponsorship system, legally binds a migrant worker to their employer, who's known as a kafil. This sponsor has control over the worker's visa and their legal status. And that one word, binds, that is the key to understanding the entire power dynamic here. Let's just break down how this works in the real world. First, the sponsor controls your legal right to even be in the country. If you want to change jobs, you need your current employer's permission. In a lot of cases, you even need your sponsor's approval for an exit visa just to go home. And then there's the confiscation of passports, which, while often illegal, is a common practice reported by human rights groups, effectively trapping workers. As you can imagine, this level of control creates a situation that is just ripe for exploitation. When you move past the legal mechanics and look at the real-world consequences, the numbers and the reports, they paint a pretty grim picture of the human cost. Over 6,500. Let that number sink in for a moment. That's the estimated number of migrant workers from just 5 South Asian countries who died in Qatar in the 10 years after it was awarded the World Cup. This isn't just a random number. It was compiled from government sources by an investigation from The Guardian. Human Rights Watch describes exactly how this system can be exploited. They say it can lead to conditions of forced labor. I mean, it makes sense, right? When workers are dependent on their employer for their legal status, their housing, and even their ability to leave, the power imbalance is just immense. This is why so many have compared it to modern slavery. Now, it's really important to note that things are changing, but it's slow. Some countries, like Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, have officially ended or reformed the system. The UAE has diluted its power, but in other nations, it's still very much practiced. And even where reforms have been made, human rights organizations argue that the key elements of control often stay in place, leaving workers vulnerable. And right here, we need to make a very deliberate pivot, because coexisting in these exact same societies is a completely different reality. It's one that's defined not by control and dependence, but by empowerment and agency. And we see this so clearly when we look at the experiences of young, educated Emirati women. This brings us to the vision these nations have for their own citizens. The UAE, for instance, has an official national goal. It's all about creating a knowledge-based economy for the well-being of its people. It's a vision built on intellectual growth and internal empowerment, and it's a stark contrast to the sponsorship model we just talked about. You can see the contrast so clearly just in the language used to describe each world. I mean, look at this. The vocabulary of the Kafala system is all about dependence, being bound, sponsored, controlled, needing permission. Then you look at the language of agency and it's all about empowerment. Freedom, ability, responsibility, self-reliance. It's night and day. So what does this agency actually look like on the ground? Well, a recent study asked young Emirati women to define it for themselves. And for them, it was this really rich, multifaceted idea. The ability to create change, having control over their own choices, self-confidence, the freedom to act without fear, and taking responsibility for their own lives. It's a worldview built on what they see as immense opportunity and self-determination. So how in the world do we reconcile these two realities? The key thing to understand is that we don't have to pick one as the true one. They aren't mutually exclusive. They're two sides of the same coin, a paradox that sits right at the heart of the modern Gulf. When you boil it all down, the core conflict is this. The Gulf's development model is essentially twofold. You have a knowledge economy designed to empower citizens, which is built on top of a sponsorship economy that controls migrants. One reality, in many ways, provides the foundation for the other. And that leaves us with a final question to think about. This isn't just about labor laws or economics. It's about the very definition of progress itself. What does it really mean for a society to advance when the experience of freedom and agency isn't something that's shared by everyone living within it? When you think of the United Arab Emirates, chances are you're picturing soaring skyscrapers, incredible luxury malls, basically a vision of the future built right there in the desert. It's an image of ambition, of progress, and it's been very carefully crafted and broadcast to the entire world. I mean, from the dizzying heights of the Burj Khalifa to those man-made islands you can see from space, the UAE projects this incredible international brand. It's sold as a vibrant, tolerant place just full of opportunity, and it works, right? It's a huge magnet for tourists, professionals, and investors. But what if I told you that for many of the people who actually live and work there, there's a whole other reality? One that exists just beneath that gleaming, polished surface. A reality that's governed by a completely different set of rules, with much, much higher stakes. And that's what we're going to explore. So let's start with the experience of the expats, the folks who are drawn to the UAE by that promise of a tax-free, high-flying lifestyle. You know, a lifestyle that's often financed by credit, where the consequences of falling behind are unlike almost anywhere else on Earth. And this right here, this is the absolute fundamental difference. See, for most of us, if you can't pay a loan, it's a civil matter. You might have to deal with debt collectors, maybe even bankruptcy. But in the UAE, it's not a civil issue. It's a crime. You're looking at actual criminal charges. This slide really lays out the cycle, and it's a terrifying one. You miss a payment, and you could face a jail sentence of up to 3 years. But here's the really crucial part. Serving that time in prison doesn't actually clear the debt. After you're released, the bank can just file a civil case, which can send you right back to prison, this time indefinitely, until every last penny is paid back. It just seems totally at odds with this image of a modern international financial hub, doesn't it? But from the bank's point of view, there's a logic to it. A pretty chilling logic. And what's really striking here is just how open they are about it. The country head of HSBC in the UAE actually explained it to a magazine. He said jailing debtors isn't really about punishment, it's about leverage. The person in jail basically becomes a hostage, and the bank just waits for a worried family member to sell a house or drain their life savings to get their loved one out. Okay, so you might be thinking, well, what if you just flee the country before they can arrest you? Surely you're safe then, right? After all, Interpol isn't in the business of chasing down personal debts. Well, that's a common and pretty dangerous misunderstanding. You see, there's a loophole. The UAE is one of Interpol's largest voluntary donors. And by reclassifying a simple debt case as fraud, the banks can request an international red notice. And just like that, a missed car payment could get you flagged on a global wanted list, risking arrest anytime you try to cross an international border. The financial risks for professional expats are incredibly severe. But that's only one part of the story. Because for every one of those gleaming towers, there's the harsh reality for the millions of people who actually built them. The low-wage migrant workers who are the real backbone of the UAE's economy. We're talking about millions of workers, mostly from countries like India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. Their lives, their employment, their very presence in the country is governed by a sponsorship system that human rights groups have called highly exploitative. It's known as the Kafala system. So what is Kafala? Well, the simplest way to think about it is this. Your employer, your sponsor, literally controls your legal right to be in the country. Your visa isn't tied to the government, it's tied to your boss. And this creates this massive, massive power imbalance, leaving workers incredibly vulnerable. And this power imbalance has led to widespread, well-documented abuses. It's very common for employers to just confiscate passports, basically trapping workers. Wages are often paid late, if they're paid at all. Human rights reports are filled with stories of workers living in squalid, cramped conditions, facing physical and verbal abuse, and for many female domestic workers, sexual abuse, with almost no chance of ever getting justice. This gap between that progressive image and the often restrictive reality, well, it extends far beyond labor and finance. It also deeply affects personal freedoms, especially for women and for LGBTQ+ individuals. Now, the UAE has announced several reforms for women's rights recently, and on the surface they look like a real step forward. But when you start to look at the fine print, you find that the old structures of control are often still firmly in place. So, for example, a new domestic violence law was passed, but it also reinforces a man's right to discipline his family, and it completely fails to criminalize marital rape. A woman can technically get a job, but if her husband objects, a judge can rule she's failing in her duties. And she can even lose her right to financial support if she withholds sex without a lawful excuse. In practice, male authority is still legally enshrined. So that brings up another big question. What is the climate like for LGBT+ people in a country that sells itself as this modern, global hub? Well, a report from Out Leadership, which assesses the business climate for LGBTQI+ individuals, it paints a pretty stark picture. The UAE gets a score of just 2.5 out of 10. And when you look at why, it's clear. There's no legal recognition for same-sex relationships, no protection from employment discrimination, and consensual homosexual acts are completely illegal. The legal reality is severe. All same-sex sexual activity is a crime. Under civil law, punishments can go up to 14 years in prison, but the UAE has a dual legal system, and under Sharia law, it can be punishable by death. Even things like cross-dressing are criminalized, and there are reports of police using digital surveillance and dating apps to entrap people. So, when you take a step back and look at all of this, you really start to see two completely different versions of the UAE emerging. On one side, you have that powerful, globally recognized image of progress, luxury, and opportunity. But on the other side, based on the country's own laws and documented human rights reports, there's a very different reality, one of criminalized debt, systemic labor exploitation, and the legal discrimination and persecution of women and LGBT+ people. It's a nation of just incredible contrasts, a hyper-modern vision of the future that's been built on foundations and laws that can seem anything but. Which really just leaves us with a final question. For the millions of foreigners who call it home, whether they're in a penthouse suite or a crowded labor camp, what is the true price of building and living in this modern-day paradise? So, when you think of the United Arab Emirates, what's the first thing that comes to mind? For a lot of us, it's probably those gleaming skyscrapers, these incredible mega projects, and this reputation as a major hub for global business. And you know what? That reputation is well earned. But like with any big, complex story, there's always a lot more going on just beneath the surface. So let's take a closer look together. This right here, this is the image the world sees. The UAE, and especially Dubai, has done an incredible job of positioning itself as this super resilient, top-tier hub for multinational corporations. It really is a landscape of ambition made real, a magnet that pulls in money and talent from all over the globe. And that shiny exterior is, without a doubt, impressive. But it really makes you ask the question, what's the foundation that all of this is built on? To really understand the UAE today, we have to look at the different and sometimes clashing realities that exist there at the same time. Okay, so first, let's talk about the promise. We're going to start with what makes the UAE so incredibly attractive to the world's business elite. I mean, how did it become such a powerhouse on the global stage so quickly? Now, what's really fascinating here is how all these factors work together. Let's start with zero personal income tax. I mean, right there, that's a massive draw for the best talent from around the world. Then you back that up with an unbelievably streamlined system. Getting a work permit in 5 days, that's almost unheard of anywhere else. And all this efficiency builds a ton of confidence because the government actually delivers on its promises. From these huge infrastructure projects to business-friendly policies, it's a well-oiled machine, truly designed for growth. But a machine like that, well, it needs a massive engine to make it run. So let's shift our focus and look at the people who are actually powering this extraordinary development. It's a really simple question, isn't it? But the answer tells you something absolutely fundamental about how the UAE is structured. Who are the people on the ground building those skyscrapers, driving the deliveries, and working in all the hotels and restaurants? This number, it's just staggering. Over 90%, more than 9 out of every 10 people in the entire workforce in the UAE are migrant workers, coming mostly from South and Southeast Asia. The country's economic miracle is almost completely dependent on foreign labor. And the legal system that governs this huge workforce is called the Kafala system. Now, this isn't just a regular work visa, it's a sponsorship system that legally ties a worker to their employer. And this bond gives the employer an incredible amount of power, including, in practice, the ability to take a worker's passport and control whether they can change jobs or even leave the country. So here's the crucial part. This whole system operates in a place with basically no safety net for workers. As this quote points out, there are no independent trade unions, no political parties. There's no legal way for workers to organize or bargain together. So if you are a worker facing exploitation, you have very, very few options. Alright, let's switch gears to another one of these paradoxes, the digital world. The UAE is a showcase of futuristic connectivity, but that connection comes with some pretty significant strings attached. At 99%, that means pretty much everybody is online. The UAE has one of the highest internet penetration rates on the entire planet. The infrastructure is top-notch. 5G speeds are some of the fastest you can find. So on the surface, it looks like a digital paradise. But here's the other side of that coin. An organization that tracks internet freedom around the world gives the UAE a score of just 30 out of 100. That puts it firmly in the not free category. So you've got this incredible access, but what you can actually do with that access is heavily, heavily restricted. And this is how that control actually plays out. It's not just about blocking websites that criticize the government. We're talking about basic communication tools like WhatsApp calls and FaceTime being disabled, which kind of pushes you towards using the state-controlled telecom services. What's even more concerning is the documented use of really sophisticated spyware like Pegasus to monitor activists and journalists. You combine that with a very strict cybercrime law, and the result is, well, it's a culture of self-censorship. People just know they're being watched, so they watch what you say. Okay. Finally, let's look at the physical cost of this rapid, resource-heavy development model. What's its impact on the planet? To get our heads around this, we're going to use a measurement called per capita CO2 emissions. It's a pretty simple but really powerful way to understand the environmental footprint of an average person's lifestyle in a country, everything from the electricity they use to how they get around. And the data here is crystal clear. The average person in the UAE has one of the largest carbon footprints on Earth. And when you think about it, it's a direct result of building and maintaining a modern lifestyle in the desert, a model that relies heavily on fossil fuels, constant air conditioning, and turning saltwater into fresh water. So we have all these different threads, right? A story about business efficiency, a story about human labor, a digital story of connection and control, and an environmental story. So, how do they all fit together? This really lays the paradox bare. On the one side, you've got all the celebrated achievements that make the UAE a global player. The streamlined business, no income tax, incredible connectivity. And on the other side, you have the foundations and the consequences of that success. The Kafala system, the lack of workers' rights, the constant surveillance, and that massive carbon footprint. These two columns, they aren't separate things. They're two sides of the exact same coin. Ultimately, the story of the modern UAE kind of forces us to ask a really fundamental question. The progress is undeniable, the vision is ambitious, and the execution is, in so many ways, remarkable. But when you look at the whole picture, you're left to wonder, what is the true price of this progress, and who exactly is paying it? You know, every nation has a story it tells itself. It's a story about progress, about ambition, about building a bigger, better future. And it's a powerful story, full of gleaming towers and booming industries. But today, we're going to look at two stories running side by side. One is a grand national vision, and the other is a hidden global reality. So let's start with that grand plan. We're looking at the official strategy from the Emirates Development Bank. You can think of it as the financial engine that's really designed to power the UAE's industrial growth and help it branch out from its traditional economic strengths. And we're talking about some serious numbers here. The bank's plan is to pump 30 billion dirhams into the economy over 5 years. And the goal? To directly boost the national GDP by more than 10 billion dirhams. It's all about positioning the country as a major industrial player. Now, this investment isn't just being scattered around. It's very strategically targeted at 5 specific core sectors. These are the areas the nation views as the pillars for a future-proof economy. We're talking manufacturing, infrastructure, advanced tech, healthcare, and critically food security. The idea here is to create this powerful, self-feeding cycle. The investment is supposed to drive industrial progress, which in turn creates skilled jobs, boosts the economy, and then, well, it attracts even more investment. It's a classic blueprint for growth. But here's the thing. This kind of rapid, large-scale development, not just here, but all over the world, it relies on a huge workforce. And that's where the story gets a lot more complicated. And this really brings us to a crucial turning point. We've seen the blueprint, we've seen the ambition. But this kind of development, no matter where it's happening, it needs a massive human engine to make it all work. So you have to ask the question, who is actually building this modern world? So, we're going to shift gears now. We're moving from that national plan to a global condition. We're turning our focus to a reality that so often stays in the shadows of these big development projects, the world's hidden workforce. According to the 2023 Global Slavery Index, there are an estimated 50 million people, 50 million, living in conditions of modern slavery right now. And get this, that's an increase of 10 million people in just 5 years. This is not a problem that's getting better. The data clearly shows it's getting worse. Now, it's really important we're on the same page about what this term means. Modern slavery isn't just one thing. It's an umbrella term, right? It covers a whole range of abusive practices where, because of threats or violence or deception, a person simply cannot refuse or leave. And if you break down that 50 million figure, you see it splits into two huge categories. 28 million people are trapped in forced labor, and that can be anything from construction work to domestic service, and then another 22 million are in forced marriages. Okay, so now we connect these two stories. This is the point where those ambitious blueprints for development collide with the reality of a globalized labor force, and it's where we can start to look at both the risks involved and how governments are or aren't responding. The Global Slavery Index actually scores governments on their response to this crisis, and you can see here that the level of action varies a lot. You've got countries like the UK and Australia, which are rated as having the strongest responses, and then you see others like the UAE, which fall into that 40 to 50% range, putting them in the same bracket as countries like Italy and the Philippines. The index also pinpoints specific risk factors in different regions. For the Arab states, one key area of concern that the report highlights is the Kafala system, which is a sponsorship system. Basically, it legally ties a migrant worker's residency status directly to their employer, and that can create a huge power imbalance, making workers much more vulnerable to exploitation. And these systemic risks, they have devastating human consequences. A survivor, Fines Lapinga, described the kind of extreme isolation and control that can happen. She said, "My employer took away my passport, locked me in the house. I was so isolated from the outside world that I had no idea there was help available." But here's the thing, this isn't an issue that's just confined to one region or one system. It's actually woven into the very fabric of our global economy. It's in the supply chains of the products that many of us use every single day. The scale of this economic link is just staggering. The world's wealthiest countries, the G20 nations, they import an estimated $468 billion worth of goods every year that are at risk of being made with forced labor. Let that sink in. You see this especially in industries with complex supply chains that are really hard to track. The report shines a light on sectors like fishing, where forced labor can happen miles out at sea, totally out of sight. But it's also in things like garments, electronics, and palm oil, products that are, everywhere in the global market. In this, exploitation can even be state-imposed. Dominic Morgan, a former inmate in the US, described the abuse of prison labor like this: "I had to work. You don't get days off, you don't get to have sick days, and if I didn't go to work, it was a rule violation." It's a really stark reminder that forced labor comes in many forms, sometimes even backed by the very systems that are supposed to uphold the law. So all of this, it brings us to the central and, frankly, a deeply uncomfortable question. When we celebrate progress and rapid development, we have to stop and ask what, or maybe who, is paying the price for it. Despite all the international promises, like the UN's goal to end modern slavery by 2030, the data shows we are moving in the exact wrong direction. The report points out that because the problem is getting bigger while government action is basically stalling, we are farther away from that goal than we've ever been. And so, in the end, we're left with this fundamental tension we have to think about. On one hand, you have this clear, powerful drive for economic growth and national prestige. And on the other, you have the stark reality of human exploitation that's embedded in our global systems. The real challenge for all of us is to ask, how do we build a future where one doesn't come at the cost of the other?